Hey artists! Welcome to another tutorial. Today we're going to be learning how to paint this majestic looking tiger. Now for this particular painting, I wanted it to have a strong backlight. And I personally love the way this looks. It gives such a unique dynamic look to any portrait you do. And it meant that I was going to be using a lot more darker colors. So the background was going to be really dark. The tiger was largely going to be pretty dark with some really heavy shadows. But then we're going to have a really bright sort of wispy outline where that light behind the tiger is catching on all that fluff that's kind of, on the outside of the cat. And it's going to basically give it a really cool halo effect. So with that in mind, let's begin. So like usual, I'm starting on a canvas that I've primed, and then basically I just did a dilute wash of acrylic paint, so I wasn't working on a white canvas anymore. And like all my paintings, I like to start by mapping in those darkest parts first. So here I'm going in with some black and a really large brush, and yeah, I'm just basically mapping out where all of those big dark areas are going to go. Now, like I mentioned in the beginning, I'm going to be doing some backlighting here, and this is really going to pop if we have a really nice dark background. It doesn't really pop super well otherwise, so that's why I'm going in with a really big brush again, and with my oil paints here, just basically doing a nice dark background, and that's going to help to make that light pop. So now that all that black is in place, I've got a really good sort of map of where everything is going to go in my painting. Now I'm going to start with my darkest colors. So because I'm painting a tiger here, the tiger fur will end up being like a dark rusty colored orange. So I'm starting with a really dark, rich brown in those shadowed regions. Now, I wanted this cat to kind of have a little bit of attitude, so I'm using that same dark paint to kind of carve out a little bit of a forehead structure here, kind of like a little bit of a frown. There's those tiger eyebrows that are kind of furrowing down. So I'm using that dark paint to kind of carve that out a little bit. So now that I've got that darkest tone in there, I'm going in and I'm adding a little bit of a little yellow ochre, a little burnt sienna, a little titanium white here to my paint to start to make it a little lighter. And then I'm going to start to pack that into those blank areas. So I'm always moving from darkest to lightest. If you're craving more help with painting a realistic wildlife easily, then you will love the Wildlife Painting Academy. Each month, new masterclasses are added, complete with my voice walking you through every moment, paint mixing recipes, reference photos, and so much more. You can check it out in the link in the description of this video. So I added even more white to my paint here to make it even lighter, and I'm going in and packing that into like the high points of the face, certain areas that are going to be getting that brighter paint. And then I'm going to move on to the white fur. So now onto our white fur. Now again, because our cat here is going to be backlit, most of what we're going to see is going to be in shadow. So although on the cat this is going to be white fur, you can tell here that it's definitely not white paint. It's a medium to dark-ish gray. And that's because this portion of the cat that we see here is very largely in shadow. So we actually don't want it to be white. That would look pretty bizarre with the lighting on the rest of our tiger here. All right, so now the fun begins with our backlighting. As you can kind of see here, I've left a bit of a margin around my entire tiger here. So between, the edge of what I've painted in the tiger portrait and that black background, I've left that blank space. And now what I'm gonna do is go ahead and paint in that backlighting. So I'm mostly gonna be sticking with titanium white here. So I am grabbing it pretty strong, so I'm not really mixing it with any other colors. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I do want it to be really bright. And I'm gonna add some color into it once I move into my glazing, but also because I'm working with oils here and they're still wet. So for instance, that background is wet black paint and the rest of the tiger portrait is also wet oil paint. So I know that there's going to be a little bit of blending into that titanium white that I'm using for my backlight. So I'm not too worried about it looking too crazy bright at this phase. I know there's going to be some blending happening, and then once we move into our glazing, that's when we're going to be able to really amp it up and add some gorgeous colors to it. So now that I kind of have everything blocked in, all of my canvas is covered, there's obviously no details yet, so now I'm going to start to build up a little bit of that fur texture. So I'm just still using a really large brush here, but I'm basically using like the knife edge of a filbert brush, going in with that lighter sort of rusty colored paint, and just starting to build up that preliminary fur texture. Here I'm, like I mentioned, working with oil paint, and I'm working into a wet layer here. So I haven't let it dry yet, which is why there is going to be a lot of blending. I'm not going to get any crazy bright brush strokes yet, but that's okay because I find that makes, it makes it a lot easier to build up a more realistic looking painting. So I put my painting aside for a few days. I was really happy with my underpainting and I wanted it to dry completely before I went on and put in some more layers. So painting is now completely dry. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to still work a lot on that detail phase. So I'm working on building up that fur texture and I'm going to start with a lot of dark paint first to kind of carve that out. And then once I have those shadows established, I like to move into my highlights. So you can see here, all of my details are laid in with my dark paint, and now I'm actually going to start to go in with lighter paint. So kind of going in with a lighter sort of rusty colored tone to start building up that fur detail when it comes to the light aspect of it. And then also detailing that white fur, starting to go in with some lighter gray tones. Now, I have a ton of tutorials already on my YouTube channel for how to paint fur. I even have one for how to paint tiger fur. So if you want more detail on how to do that, I highly recommend checking out one of those videos. So now I'm going in with much lighter paint here, still building up that fur texture. And at this point, I'm not worried about the fact that my cat isn't nearly as orange as I want him to be. That's totally okay. Right now, what I want to do is I want to build up that texture of the fur. I want to build up a beautiful form here. And then through the magic of glazing, I'm going to be able to reinforce all those gorgeous shadows and really build up that beautiful rusty orange color that is so signature to these tigers. So up until this point, a lot of my stripes kind of got a little lost in the mix and I just didn't paint some stripes altogether. So now that I have a good base for my fur texture happening here, I'm going to go back and sort of reinforce those black stripes and adding all those tiny little delicate stripes that you're going to see in like the forehead. So now I'm using those detailed brushes. Here I'm just using a round brush that comes to a nice fine point, and I'm gonna go and basically reinforce that haloed effect. So that gorgeous backlighting, I'm adding those individual little hairs that are gonna be coming off the tiger and that are caught by the light. I love this technique so much. And this particular step of where you're actually going in and detailing that is so much fun. I highly recommend that you try. And now the magic of glazing. So like I mentioned before, I was focusing on building up the form and also like the texture and detail that I wanted. And along the way, I lost that kind of orange rusty colored look that is signature to tigers. But no fear, this is where glazing comes in. I let my painting dry completely, and I mean that, it needs to be completely dry. And now I'm mixing up a glaze using my favorite oil painting glazing medium, Liquid Original by Winsor & Newton. And I'm starting off by adding a glaze over all of that orange fur. It is totally gonna transform your painting, and what's lovely is that you can let it dry and do more layers to be able to really amp up that effect. But yeah, you're still going to be able to see all that gorgeous detail and texture that you built into your painting, but now we can play around with the color. I'm also using some glazes here to basically punch up those shadows a little bit. So when I was adding detail to that white fur, it kind of got a little too bright for my taste. I wanted it to be more in shadow. So this is where I actually went in and added a shadow glaze over that white fur to darken it again. I also added a gorgeous glaze to those eyes to really make them glow. And now it's time for some final details and highlights. Starting with the eyes here, I'm using a tiny little round brush with some titanium white paint and just basically adding those final highlights that are going to bring everything to life. I'm also adding a couple selective little white dots here and there around the eyes and the nose, just to basically show that they're wet. And those tiny little dots are going to go a long way to adding that little bit of life that we're looking for. And finally, I'm going in again with that detail brush, and wherever I need it, putting in a couple last minute details just to make the entire painting pop. And we're done! Thank you so much for watching this tutorial on how to paint this gorgeous backlit tiger portrait. Now, if you want to improve your animal art, then you'll definitely want to check out my free guide, 5 tips for improving your animal art. You can grab the free guide in the description of this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.